viewers, this is Angela Murjani from Kasturba Gandhi College in Hyderabad. I welcome you to today's session, which is going to be on William Shakespeare, and I promise you that it's going to be a really special session. You may be wondering why special, and the reason is that because Shakespeare is so special. If you have never had the opportunity to read Shakespeare before, I assure you that by the end of this session, you are going to be quite amazed by this man. He broke through the boundaries that were political, cultural, and even time-bound, and he still impacts lives and people today. Although William Shakespeare is most popularly known for his plays, it's his sonnets actually that are well loved throughout the world. In fact, his sonnet number 18, Shall I Compare Thee to a Summer's Day, and his sonnet number 73, That Time of Year Thou Mayst in Me Behold, and sonnet 116, Let Me Not to the Marriage of True Minds, which we are going to study today, are some of the most loved and highly appreciated poems in the whole canon of English literature. Shakespeare composed a total of about 154 sonnets, and these were all written between 1592 and 1596. They were published later, however, in 1609 by a man called Thomas Thorpe, who published them without getting Shakespeare's permission. Now, these sonnets have all been dedicated rather mysteriously to a person who is known only by his initials, W.H., and the identity of this person has remained a secret forever. However, critics have debated, and there has been a lot of conjecture about who this W.H. might be, and many critics are of the opinion that the W.H. refers to a person called William Herbert, the Earl of Pembroke, whom Shakespeare later dedicated some of the folio editions of his plays to. A majority of the sonnets, from sonnet number 1 to 126, are dedicated to the mysterious W.H. In fact, Shakespeare spent 17 sonnets just trying to convince this W.H. that he should marry and have children because he was so handsome, and Shakespeare contended that he would have children as beautiful as himself and thus let that beauty continue into immortality. Sonnets 127 to 154, that's the rest of the sonnets, have been dedicated to a promiscuous, charming and scheming lady who has come to be known to modern readers as the Dark Lady. Many critics have debated the question of whether these poems reflect Shakespeare's own personal feelings and if that would be any indication of homosexuality on his part. But since very little is known about Shakespeare's personal life, it seems unfair to judge him on the basis of the sonnets. Inasmuch as we know that Hamlet, Macbeth, and Othello are not autobiographical in nature, we can assume that the sonnets too are fictional. All sonnets are poems that have 14 lines, but the Shakespearean sonnet is called by this name to differentiate it from the Italian or the Petrarchan sonnet. This is because structurally the Shakespearean sonnet is different. In a Shakespearean sonnet, there are 3 quatrains which leads up to 12 lines. So each quatrain has 4 lines, and then at the end you have a concluding couplet. A couplet is a verse of 2 lines. Couple and couplet both come from the same root and mean related to 2. So in Shakespeare's sonnet, we have the presentation of a theme or a problem in the 3 quatrains, and then after the exposition of that theme or problem, there is a solution that is offered by the poet in the concluding couplet. The rhyme scheme of Shakespeare's sonnets are A, B, A, B, C, D, C, D, E, F, E, F, and the final couplet has the rhyme scheme G, G. Shakespeare's sonnets are written in iambic pentameter, which simply means that each sonnet line consists of 10 syllables. If you want to know more about this, you can refer to the notes that follow. Now let me not stand between you and the poem any longer. Let me not to the marriage of true minds admit impediments. Love is not love which alters when it alteration finds, or bends with the remover to remove. Oh no, it is an ever-fixed mark that looks on tempest and is never shaken. It is the star to every wandering bark, whose words are known, although his height be taken. Love's not time's fool, though rosy lips and cheeks within his bending sickle's compass come. Love alters not with his brief hours and weeks, but bears it out even to the edge of doom. If this be error and upon me proved, I never writ, nor no man ever loved. Shakespeare jumps right into the argument of this poem by expressing a negative wish and saying, let me not. Now it's obvious that there has been something going on before the expression of this negative wish, and that is what he's trying to bring into focus at this moment. We can understand and gather that a lot of people, maybe even his beloved, have been telling him that this love cannot be. This love cannot last forever. Maybe they have been trying to impress upon him that love changes, that emotions alter, that love faces decay, that it's good for a few days or months or years, but after a while things will change. And as a response to all this that's coming in on him concerning his love, Shakespeare is taking a stand and saying, let me not admit any impediments. In other words, he is pretty firm and quite sure that the love that he is experiencing with his beloved, that the speaker is speaking about in the poem, is a different kind of a love. And that's what he wants to assert, that this kind of love will go on forever. It will last for all time. It is faithful, it is loyal, and it is unchanging. In this first line of the poem, the poet talks about the marriage of true minds. So we can tell that there is a marriage happening here. There is a union, but it's not the usual type of union or marriage that he's talking about. He is considering a marriage of minds, which means that this is a platonic relationship. This relationship is not physical, and it involves the similar thinking of the two people involved. Here are two people who have the same ideas on many subjects perhaps. And so this kind of a marriage, this kind of a union, which takes place between people who think alike and who are on the same wavelength, that's the kind of marriage which will last and which will not succumb to obstacles. Apparently, people have been talking to him about obstacles that will come in the pathway of love. But the poet or the speaker here is saying that such a love which is based upon a similarity of ideas will not break down even when faced with many obstacles. If you will notice, the poet uses the adjective true to qualify the noun mind. And therefore, what he's trying to tell us is that this kind of a relationship is between people who are loyal, faithful, constant, and unchanging. If their minds are of that nature, then the relationship is completely different. In the next line, when the speaker follows up his mention of marriage by talking about impediments, this makes all critics agree on one point, and that is that this is a direct reference to the Book of Common Prayer, which was used as a guideline in marriages. Now, in this Book of Common Prayer, whenever a marriage was about to be solemnized, the clergyman would ask the congregation that was present there if anybody knew about any impediment or any reason why this marriage should not take place. Then they were bound by duty to stand up and mention that reason right then and there. And if they did not, then they were to forever keep silent on that issue. So it did happen in many instances that people would stand up and maybe tell the clergyman that the man already had a wife in another village or town, or for whatever reason, and the girl would be saved from a disastrous marriage. And so this part of the Book of Common Prayer is what the speaker is referring to, that if there were any impediments at all, the speaker refuses to admit them. In other words, the speaker knows of no reason why this marriage of true minds should not take place. Now the speaker continues by saying, love is not love. Now what does that mean? It's like making a statement that says happiness is not happiness or black is not black. What does that mean? I believe that the poet means that there are many things which are masquerading as love. There are many emotions that are pretending to be love. They are parading around as if they are love, but they are not true love. Now you will agree with me that there are many people who look at somebody and feel that, oh, he's so rich. Many girls run after rich men and marry them. Is that love? No, that's not love. That is greed. There are many people who lust after women and they marry them because of that lust, but they pretend that they are in love. There are even cases of people who marry for revenge, marrying girls who belong to the family of an enemy and then wreaking havoc upon their lives. So when Shakespeare says that love is not love, what he means is the love which people call love, infatuation or greed or lust or whatever it is not that love which he is talking about in this poem. So we can guess by this time that the poet is going to describe for us what true love is really all about. Continuing, the poet says that love is not love which alters when it alteration finds. In other words, when there are changes that happen in the beloved, if an individual stops loving that person, then you can decide that that emotion which they pretended to have in the beginning was not love. You can know it by the results. For example, I read a story very recently on the news about a young man and his fiancée who were driving in a car and met with a terrible accident. The young man went into a coma. Now his fiancée nursed him for 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, 6 months, 1 year. But after 1 year, she went on her way and she married somebody else. But this young man's mother, she looked after him when he was discharged from the hospital, when the doctor said there was nothing more that they could do. She brought him home and she spoke to him every day, even though he was in a coma. And lo and behold, after 20 years, he responded to his mother's voice. Now, that is love which did not alter when it found alteration. I'm not judging the young woman. I don't hold her guilty of abandoning that young man, because she too had a life and she'd have to go her own way. But all we're saying is we're agreeing with Shakespeare here that true love is that love which does not change when it finds changes happen in its beloved. Further, the speaker says that love is not love which bends with the remover to remove. Now here there's a suggestion of some planning and scheming and some evil design on the part of some people to remove the love which the beloved has for the other. And so again the speaker is saying, if that scheming person succeeds in removing the love which a lover has for their beloved, if the beloved is able to remove that deep-rooted, deep-seated love, affection and emotion from their heart just because of somebody else's schemes and plans, then that was not love in the first place. It was something else. And again, the poet is trying to tell us that these are the qualities of love: unchanging, steadfast, loyal, faithful. These things, when we see them, we may know that the love is true. The speaker says that love is not all of those things. Oh no, he says, it is an ever-fixed mark. Now you will have noticed that I used the word F-I-X-E-D and pronounced it as fixed. Now this is not normally correct in conversation, but poets have what is called poetic license, and the poet here extends the use of that one syllable to two in order to fit the 10 syllables of iambic pentameter in this particular line. And so he says that love is an ever-fixed mark. Now what he means here is that he is using an image for navigation that is used by sailors. Now when sailors are sailing on the sea, they look out for a fixed mark on the shore in order to guide their ship safely back into the harbor. In the olden days, these could have been many things. They could have been the spire of a church or a steeple that was on the coast. It could have been a lighthouse or a beacon light or even a rock of a different or a strange shape. Sailors made use of these things in order to mark their pathway back to safety to the coastline. Now, in the modern days, we have a whole different system. We have radar and we have a whole network of lighthouses. But in the past, sailors absolutely depended for their lives upon these structures for their guidance, for their safety, and for their very life. Shakespeare, in mentioning this, is talking about the storms of life. In life, there are many, many difficulties. There are ups and there are downs. There are times of storm and there are times of calm. But the speaker is saying that throughout all of these times, and especially in times of storm, when we can look to something like a beacon, something like a lighthouse, something like a mark on the shore, we can find our path back to safety. In other words, even when people are going through troubles in their life, if love is the guiding force, if they can look to love to guide them and lead them back to safety, then their lives are not in danger. Because love, he says, is like that ever-fixed mark which can guide people back from the storm to the place of calm and safety. Continuing that image of the structures that are on the shore, the speaker says that these can look upon the tempest and never be shaken, because these structures like lighthouses and beacon houses and the spires of churches are at a great height. It would appear that they are looking down upon the sea from that height, and it gives them a kind of an all-around view of the whole picture. In drawing this comparison to the life of the lovers, what the speaker is saying is that love can be that point which raises people above the storm, above the circumstances, so that when they look at those situations from the point of view that love raises them up to, they can look down and they will not be shaken by the storms of life. The point of this whole metaphor is that those who believe in love and those who trust in love will be like those lighthouses. They will never be shaken, they will never crumble and fall down, they will be able to withhold their lives through the storms and battles of life. In line 7, the speaker says, "It is the star to every wandering bark." Now this "it" refers back to love that he's talking about in line 5. The star which mariners used in the olden days was the pole star or the North Star, also known by the name Polaris. In the olden days, when there was no equipment by which to judge which way the mariners were traveling, they looked to this one star in the northern hemisphere. While all the other stars were constantly moving around, the pole star was fixed. It never moved. And so this was a great aid for mariners, because they would look to the star and know in which direction they were headed, or if they had to turn around and head in a different direction. So again, the speaker is reiterating that every wandering bark can look to the star and find its course or direction. In other words, when life is floundering all around us, if love is in that life, then the people involved can look to love and find the course of their direction once more. Describing the star further, the speaker says that the worth of the star is not known, although the height of the star could possibly be measured. Now, what he meant by this was that in the 16th century, astronomy was not so highly developed as it was later on, and so astronomers did not really know the substance from which stars were made. It was only in the 18th century with Copernicus, Galileo and Kepler that a lot of new theories in astronomy came to be recognized as valid and true. But at this point in time, not even what the stars were made up of was known. However, it was possible to measure the distance of a star from the horizon, and people made use of a piece of apparatus called the quadrant, and the quadrant looked something like this. However, there were more compact models of the quadrant that were available for mariners to take on board ships, and they used these to judge the height of stars above the horizon. Extending the image of the star whose worth is not known although its height is known and measured, what the speaker is trying to say is that sometimes we cannot tell the true worth of love. Very often you will hear stories of people who start out completely head over heels in love. They get married and 2 or 3 years down the line they cannot stand the sight of each other. The worth of that love not known. Maybe at that point in time those two people felt that they were deeply in love, that they were very much in love, but only time would tell the true worth or value of that love. And that is the comparison which the poet is trying to make between love and the stars. Now the speaker goes on to say that love is not time's fool. In other words, love is not at the mercy of time. In Shakespeare's day and age, there were characters called fools who were something like our stand-up comedians of today. Rich people who had plenty of time and nothing to do, and remember there was no television in those days, they would call in these people to entertain them with jokes. So in this particular line, the poet is saying that love is not for entertainment, love is not a joke, love is not time pass, love is serious business. Next, the speaker goes on to speak of rosy lips and cheeks, which are all symbolic of youth and beauty. And he says that these are also not within the boundaries of time. In other words, young people do fall in love, but if it's true love, and if the beloved no longer has rosy lips and cheeks after a time, and that emotion changes, then it's not love. But if one continues to be in love, even after the rosy lips have long since disappeared, then one can judge that emotion as true love. In this sonnet, Shakespeare personifies time as a man with a scythe in his hand. The scythe is that semicircular tool of harvesting. It's a sharp blade which is used to cut off. And so again, the poet is reiterating the same subject, that time with its scythe will not be able to cut away in its sweep true love, even if rosy lips and cheeks fade away. Continuing to mention the personification of time, the poet says that love does not alter with his brief hours. In other words, though time is brief, love does not change, but love continues into eternity. Time on the earth could be measured in very small sections, weeks, months, years. But in eternity, love will continue. That's what the poet is trying to convey to us. The speaker says that love bears it out, or love endures, or love lasts right up to the edge of doom. Now, doom can mean one of two things. Either doom refers to the judgment day or doomsday, which is the last day when this planet Earth will be in existence, or personally, each person's day of death is their doomsday. So maybe the poet is saying that true love will endure until the death of the person, or even beyond death unto that day of judgment when they will be judged before God and man. We've now arrived at the concluding couplet, in which the speaker, who is so sure about what he has had to say regarding love, says that if we can prove anything wrong that he has said, then he has never written a line of poetry, nor has any man ever loved. Now that's how certain he is of his definition of true love as being an emotion that will withstand every obstacle, every difficulty, every problem, every situation, and persist and endure and last in faithfulness and in truth and in constancy right up to the death of one of the partners. That's how sure he is that Shakespeare is willing to vouch all of his writings. We know from history that Shakespeare wrote 37 plays, but in this one line he is willing to say that if any of this is untrue, using a legalistic term, saying that if we can prove that he is not right, then Shakespeare never wrote a line of poetry. And not only that, no man has ever loved. In other words, no human being has ever experienced the emotion of love. Now that tells you something about his sureness, his certainty regarding the qualities of true love. Some critics have found fault with this conclusion, and they say, what logical connection is there between love being eternal in nature and Shakespeare writing or people being in love? And many feel that this particular conclusion weakens the sonnet, as it were. Compared to the life and vibrancy that we can see in the first 12 lines of the sonnet, this particular couplet is kind of weak. However, we may look at it as an expression of Shakespeare wanting to leave us with this particular observation, that he has seen true love in his life, and this is what it looks like. It looks like an emotion that is eternal, lasting, faithful, constant, and true in every sense of the word. Possibly it's for this reason that the well-known romantic poet William Wordsworth said, "Scorn not the sonnet, for it is the key which unlocked Shakespeare's heart." Millions of lovers through the ages have been completely fascinated by this poem, "Let Me Not to the Marriage of True Minds," and have held it as a symbol of love which they have cherished, love which has been true, enduring, and lasting, love that has carried on through a lifetime of happiness.